It was 1996. Ultraman Tiga was made, my personal favorite and one of the most popular Ultras even to this day, which helped revive the Ultraman franchise, starting various concepts that many would eventually follow. With the ending of Ultraman Z and the coming of Tiga's 25th anniversary, an anniversary series by the name of Ultraman Trigger was on the horizons. His announcement and reveal was one of the most anticipated reveals that many were hoping to evoke that same impact Tiga was able to bring. Considering how successful and well received Ultraman Z was, and how Trigger is said to be the anniversary series of Ultraman Tiga, both of which managed to receive an award, the expectations for Trigger were extremely high. However, with high expectations come the possibility of great disappointment. Trigger has problems, glaring ones, but even still, it had enough things such as its concept and characters that generally kept me interested. Trigger may not be something that I wholeheartedly like, but it certainly is something that I cannot hate. To start off, we can go for its concepts. Trigger has various concepts from Tiga which were revisited, having many changes done to the original, allowing the show to feel new, while still maintaining certain aspects of the original that fans can appreciate, such as being set in an alternate universe of Tiga, having Guts Select in place of Guts for the task force, and the inverse of starting on Mars rather than on Earth, following the beginning of Ultraman Diner. Other than Tiga's design aspects, Ultraman Trigger also inherits Tiga's type changes, which were a simple but effective method of showing the need for change when the situation calls for it, with Triggers being a good evolution of the type change and a homage to it. Tiga Dark, a dark version of Tiga, also managed to get properly revisited with Trigger Dark. Trigger Dark, being Trigger himself and later acting as a separate entity, was also a great concept that Tiga could have benefited from exploring in the movies or show, but was only explored in live stage shows. A form that is a combination of light and darkness for Tiga was also briefly explored in stage shows, managed to properly get translated for Trigger's finale. Having three main villains from the start, consisting of alternate versions of the Dark Giants from the movie, was a refreshing take on villains in the new generation, particularly Dagon and Hudram with their expanded personalities, making them more memorable compared to their original counterparts. Dagon, an unbound warrior trying to experience human emotions, and the development of his relationship with Yuna and the other two members was short, but has one of the funniest interactions I've seen in recent Ultraman that fleshed him out into a very likable character, especially to the end.
何のつもりだ？
この顔を見てわからんはずはなかろう。
わかるか？
ではこれは
なんだよ。
笑っている顔なんだが。
さっきと変わんないだろ。誰がわかんだよ。
Hudram, the most cunning and coldest of the three, enjoys creating chaos, massacring an entire planet, and carrying out various attacks throughout the show by himself, with monsters instead of relying on his companions, eventually even betraying his own teammates, making him truly an evil and standout villain.
これにてお別れです。私が闇の王になった暁には、せいぜいこき使って差し上げますよ。
Kalmira, their leader, is the least interesting, as her main goal is still wanting to get her lover back, though I would say it's actually tragic that she went insanely mad just for her cause, to a point of going against her own companions, and no longer caring about the world. Her later becoming a monster based on Tiga's final villain in the series was also a great concept, allowing her to be able to pay homage to said series and movie, making her a suitable final villain for Trigger. As nice as how some of these concepts were done, the same can't be said for the story and characters. Even so, they still have some redeeming aspects. For story, we mostly follow our protagonist Kengo, or Ultraman Trigger, who joins Guts Select to fight off against the three giants and many other monsters that appear throughout the show. A big mystery surrounding Trigger's past is explored, with some events foreshadowed early on, later occurring, leading to various conflicts. Honestly, most of this is nothing new for a new gen show. Kengo is the typical type of character that does his best in order to protect his friends. His main goal throughout the series is to make sure people can smile again, even with all the chaos that occurs, which is honestly a good type of protagonist for kids to look up to in the tough times of COVID. However, this aspect of Kengo's character would have benefited a lot more had the show actually involved him with helping or interacting with civilians, while exploring more on the aspect of him being both human and light. Maybe expand his occupation as a botanist and at least establish proper relationships with his other teammates or people outside of the team. However, most of his interactions only involve with Akito, Yuna, and Ignis as they are the more active characters, and it doesn't help with the fact that he has a very overused phrase
スマイルスマイル
which is used for cheering people, which would have been fine if it was used properly. Maybe it's a cultural barrier, as the phrase feels odd for foreign viewers, sometimes forced and overused in the show. There's also no explanation as to why he uses the phrase, other than the fact that his mother does the same. And I assume it's supposed to mean don't be sad as there will be better days ahead, which would help make a lot of sense. The revelation of him being a giant of darkness also wasn't emphasized that well, as his past didn't really affect him that much. Much like Daigo, the protagonist of Tiga, he also isn't that complex. But he does go through one character arc, which is hinted at a few times earlier in the show, of him wanting to do his best as an Ultraman. As an Ultraman, he's the only one who can properly combat against the other threats, so he knows he has some weight to carry in protecting everyone. And at some point, Kengo took this role as a protector of humanity too far, and it gets to him, thinking he was reincarnated only to fight the darkness, regardless of how much he gets himself hurt, even if it's a result of him not being able to control his powers. An obvious change from how he usually acts. Although he doesn't go through much trouble or have big internal conflicts when struggling to control a new power like most protagonists, the main problem wasn't him physically unable to control it. It was more to his mental state interfering him. How he overcame this was not to everyone's liking. He overcomes this by being beaten up, sparring, and having a dance sequence. Though the dance sequence seems dumb, it was to help empty his mind, which later helped him realize that he should be fighting for his own ideals instead of constantly pushing himself too hard, or a fate that's forced on him. While I do agree that this could have been done so much better, but I wouldn't say that it doesn't work for his character either, because
やっぱりケンゴ笑顔が一番だよ。スマイルスマイル。
he was just a regular person who wanted to make everyone smile again, suddenly having power and responsibility shoved to him. So rather than just giving his all for others because he had to, giving his all because he wants to fits his character. Other than that, the fact that he decided to seal himself away for everyone else's sake at the end of the show just symbolizes how much he's willing to sacrifice himself, having a very different fate from other Ultraman protagonists in the new generation thus far, truly making him a heroic character.
地球はお前が守った笑顔で溢れてるぞケンゴ
Following Kengo are Yuna and Akito. Akito is one of the core cast of the show, playing a very big role in the main team. Orphaned at a young age and later developed a love interest with his adoptive sister Yuna, he's the genius who's designed nearly everything that the Task Force Gut Select uses, ranging from their weapons, the aircraft, the main ship, and Trigger's very own transformation device. One of the most interesting aspects of Akito is the fact that he himself wanted to become Ultraman Trigger to protect Yuna, but couldn't, leading to his grudge against Kengo.
これは俺がユナを守るために作ったんだ俺がこの手で光の巨人にお前じゃない
Unfortunately, this love triangle wasn't properly developed well in the series and could have been used better for a more mature storyline. His relationship with Kengo is honestly the emotional core of the series, which was developed naturally as the show progressed. Although it wasn't as deep as I expected it to be, the show did a serviceable job at developing his character. Sure, most of the time he tells Kengo to, but deep down is a person who does his best for his teammates, even when having to do with two people describing how cool it feels to be an Ultraman while he's fixing transformation devices that he can't use. He is someone who genuinely cares, and slowly his relationship with Kengo improves from bitter teammates to a reliable friend to have, even with Kengo's annoying
スマイルスマイル。
Even though he feels like a character that really deserves to be an Ultra, despite the fact that he wasn't able to, what he does throughout the show makes up for it, making him one of the best supporting characters in the series.
おかえり。
おかえりまったく最後まで世話が焼けるありがとうアキトユナ声が聞こえたんだ二人が僕を呼ぶ声だから戻ってこられたうざいいつものスマイルスマイルはどこ行ったんだ
Yuna is a descendant of Yuzare, similar to the one from Tiga, is a prominent character who has a very deep connection to the Ultra, and in Trigger acts as the key to opening the Eternity Core, the main plot device the Dark Giants have their eyes on. Yuzare also sacrificed herself to see away the Dark Giants, thus also making Yuna one of their main targets. Making Yuzare a prominent character, especially with the other cast in the series, was something that Tiga could have benefited from, as to expand the lore of Tiga, and Yuna facing the fear of sharing the same fate as her ancestor while still wanting to protect everyone's smiles like Kengo is good characterization on paper, however it wasn't all that clear and sometimes hard to notice. Her optimism and chemistry with Kengo and Akito work well enough, however, similar to Kengo, I wish her relationship with the other members were more properly established as well, especially considering she has been part of the team much longer compared to him. Despite her role leaving much to be desired, still, she has her moments, being the only one unaffected by the delusions and even standing up to one of the Giants of Darkness.
私たちは人間はあなたたちなんかに負けない絶対に
Ignis is the alien treasure hunter in the series, acting as one of Kengo's allies outside of the main team, acting also as one of the biggest differing elements between Trigger and Tiga. In the first half of the show, he is honestly just there either to mess around with the main team or help them on some occasions. He does have ties with one of the Giants of Darkness that massacred all of his people. With his determination to get back at Hoodrum and revive his people, he eventually manages to get his hands on Trigger's old powers, later becoming Trigger Dark's host. Seeing how he was a selfish person, only using people to get what he wants, slowly turning into someone who becomes selfless, is one of the best aspects of his character, though much like all of the other characters, it could have been done a lot better with a few more episodes or more focus on it. Now Kengo, Akito, Yuno, and sometimes Ignis are the prominent core cast. They aren't perfect and could use more episodes to develop them, but they were given enough to at least stand out compared to the rest of the main team. Other than the need for more development, this is where the problems stand out. The captain, sure, acts like a captain and cares for his teammates. Other than that, he doesn't have much going for him. The other characters are also just too quirky and sometimes used for comic relief. I would explain these characters, but they aren't really characters. Sure, they're introduced well, playing decent roles and getting things done, and are often seen working together in defeating the monster, but rarely do we see them interact with the main tree without being involved with the enemy of the week, especially in the second half. We never get to see them outside of being in a task force or why they are in one. There are also no characters from the original Tiga series, including the protagonist himself, so the series did not entirely feel like a shared world with Tiga. There was, however, Yuna's father, who came from Tiga's world to slightly connect things only to a certain extent, and that's it. I honestly would not mind these type of characters should they be given enough time for their own stories throughout the series. Even the earlier Ultraman shows have quirky characters. Though they aren't my favorite and are also often played for comic relief, they were given opportunity to go through some form of development, making them a lot more endearing.
私の声はあの人にでもね、やめたくない、諦めたくない。地球人も宇宙人もみんなが元気で楽しくいられるように。どうしていいのか、何をしたらいいのか、私に何ができるのか、全然何もわからないけど、でもじーっとしててもどうにもならないから。
Another problem with the show are the villains. As unique as they were in some aspects, in the end, they're just generic villains wanting the darkness to rule over everything. Not to say generic villains are bad, just that it can be done better by showing the results of their actions. We rarely get to see the struggles from the perspective of a civilian or the main team interacting with them, which would have honestly helped complement Kengo's goals of wanting to make other people smile again, especially when the entire world is in danger. Kengo also does not have any personal grudges against any of them. While Dargon and Hoodrum did get their proper ends from their respective rivals, Kengo didn't get proper closure with Chimera, other than just fighting for the light against darkness. The theme of light and darkness can only be stretched so much, which is why it worked better in Tiga's movie rather than being stretched throughout the whole series. The main villains also act as a double-edged sword, as the show wasn't able to capitalize on making more self-contained storylines that help with Tiga's popularity. Episodes that don't contribute to the overall story but written for the other characters, allowing a personal story or something thought-provoking.
早く怪獣なんか出ない世の中になればいいのにね。そしたら
そのために TPC やガツは強くなっていくんだ。平和を守ってるんだぞ、俺たちは。
平和？今が平和？お兄ちゃんたちが戦うのをやめれば、神様も怪獣を出すのをやめれば、きっと。
Some monsters that do appear are either just mindless creatures or at least affected or related to the Dark Giants, with most of them being obvious recolors of previous monsters, making them feel cheap. Other than a show meant to carry the weight of Tiga's legacy, which is heavy enough, the show cramped 2 crossovers with Z and the new Ultra Galaxy Fight miniseries, both of which felt a bit forced as there never was an equivalent for them in Tiga, with the exception of Ultraman Reboot. As random as the crossovers were, they were handled well by making them feel integral to the growth of some characters, and the strength of the team's weaponry at the cost of possible personal episodes for the rest of the team, causing the moment which made them feel important unearned, and it's disappointing as they were implied to have played a decent role during the announcements. There were also various scenes that made Tiga feel important, but even when Tiga did appear in the series, there was no proper build-up for the moment, making his appearance feel unneeded other than the need for a team-up. I can understand why Daigo could not have returned due to his actor's agency, but they could have at least tried making Tiga's return feel proper, because nostalgia and fanservice can only get you so far. Some things were also forgotten midway through the show, which also brings up more questions like, how are Akito and Yuna still in high school? How did Kengo learn to pilot the Guts Falcon with no prior training? How was Ignis able to absorb the powers of Trigger Dark? What happened to their opinions on Trigger's appearance on Earth? And a few more that I'll get to later. Koichi Sakamoto is a director who has been involved with various tokusatsu shows such as Kamen Rider, Ultraman, Power Rangers, Super Sentai, and Garo, just to name a few, with many regarding him as a master of directing action scenes. With his background on directing the various franchises, the fight scenes he directed in Ultraman also made the fights become the highlight of the shows, more dynamic to what we have seen previously and being able to give Trigger a very good first impression of the evolution of his work. His work for Ultraman Zero's debut movie and Ultraman G were also quite well received and did manage to help make the Ultraman franchise and Tsuburaya more successful, so this only adds to the expectations of Ultraman Trigger. However, with how Trigger ended the way it did, many people really hated how the show was handled and blamed most of it on Sakamoto, although I would agree that he did kind of ruin a good potential anniversary series for Tiga with a very odd choice of dialogues.
僕みんなを笑顔にしたくてガッツセレクトに入ったんです。でもアキトが
心配するな。いいか、
はい、
世の中のすべての悩みはな、筋トレすれば解決するんだよ。
Quirky characters and very simple storyline, and as a main director of the show, he is held responsible for everything. And considering how story-focused the original Tiga was, Sakamoto was an odd choice to be made as the main director, as most people will agree that he is an extremely good action director, but not the best as a story-driven director. Hence, the action scenes in Trigger were amazing, while the story was very lackluster. However, Sakamoto isn't devoid of being able to do character-focused or emotional scenes, as he has managed to do them in his previous works, and even in Trigger, with the only problem with it not having proper build-up, which is odd as he was able to give all the characters in G the time they needed. I also would not blame him entirely for how Trigger ended up, other than the fact that he was also directing the next Ultra Galaxy Fight miniseries simultaneously with Ultraman Trigger. I don't think he had proper control of the series, considering that from the beginning, the higher-ups at Tsuburaya had asked him to hire writers which had no history in making Ultraman episodes, experimental and dangerous, especially during an anniversary series to say the least. While they were ambitious and able to come up with great and unique concepts for an Ultraman show, while still borrowing elements from Tiga, but eventually it got heavily revised and honestly removed a lot from what would have made it unique, allowing for deeper characters and better interactions. Changes from the start are not the biggest problem as it's still within the planning phase, which can be corrected. However, there were also various decision changes from the higher ups which happened in the middle of production, causing the already planned script to be rewritten and more problems in production. Such as with Bandai, the second biggest sponsor to Tsuburaya, insisting on having a secondary Ultra for the series, causing the show to rush the plot of Trigger achieving his strongest form in episode 12, much earlier compared to previous shows, debuting theirs at episode 15 onwards. This also meant that the script had to be rewritten again to follow the original script for Ignis becoming an Ultra with Trigger Dark acting as a secondary Ultra. An odd choice as Ignis initially didn't have a proper relationship with Kengo or Trigger unlike Yuna and Akito, and his story can still work by using a completely different Ultra. Kyrialoid, a major monster from Tiga, was also meant to appear more times in the series, however the higher ups only allowed the new suit to be used in episodes where Tiga is present. There were also some things that felt like they were forgotten, most likely due to rewrites such as Trigger's weapon, the Circle Arms, being announced to play an important role later, as well as Kengo's plant, which seemed to be hinted on several occasions to play an important role later. Lastly, COVID-19 was also something still troubling Japan, and a big contributor to how the show had to be directed, limiting some scenes and possible interactions with the civilians whom we are only seen either just standing around or evacuating. Although Z was still successful while having the same limitations, other problems also have to be considered. Around February of 2021, there was an earthquake with a magnitude of 7.1 which affected 9 prefectures as well as causing various tsunamis. Around July that same year, when they were airing Trigger's earlier episodes and the production of later episodes, Japan was also experiencing the 5th wave of COVID-19 infections to a point where Japan had declared to be in a state of emergency, with the number of daily cases reported to be much higher compared to the previous year when Ultraman Z was airing. Much like most toku shows, if any real-world problems emerged, the showrunners would like to change the theme of the show to have a lighter tone or reflect the real world, sometimes even changing entire plot lines to ensure that the children watching won't be bogged down by it and instead cheered by it or learn something important. A good example of this is one work also done by Sakamoto, which was Kamen Rider Forze, that's considered one of the better series in the Kamen Rider franchise, although it had a much lighter tone compared to its predecessors, being set in high school with teen drama and having themes about friendship, never giving up, and always believing in the good of people no matter who it is. The themes were a direct response towards a March 2011 Tohoku 9.1 magnitude earthquake, which also caused a tsunami, resulting in many children to be orphaned. With that type of situation happening in Japan, it was a good decision to make Forze a light-hearted show that really touched the hearts of the audience, leading to the show's success. And 10 years later, a similar incident occurs.
はい、ですね、この作品は、スマイルスマイル、みんなを笑顔にしたいということがテーマの一つでなっております。今この日本含め世界が大変な時期なので、この作品を見てみんなに笑顔を取り戻して明るくなっていただきたいなという思いがこもっております。はい。
なるほど。
Although I still find the
スマイルスマイル
catchphrase to be weird, I don't want to hate the intention for that catchphrase and emphasis on smiles, fun parts, and not too deep storytelling in trying to evoke the same emotions that Kamen Rider Forze managed to do with the show's themes and fun catchphrases. Trigger didn't manage to fully capture what Forze was able to do, but I still believe some efforts were made in trying to do so. With what the children of Japan are experiencing having to do with earthquakes and a pandemic, I don't blame Sakamoto for trying to do the same thing 10 years later in Trigger, and many people were very understanding of his decision to do so, even with all the hate Trigger gets. There's still a number of people who very much enjoyed the show despite the issues, most of the characters, and yes, even
ほら、スマイルスマイル。
Despite all the issues that Trigger had in its story and production, the production value of the show is still something that can be appreciated. The CGI ain't the best, but it's a big improvement compared to its previous usages in the franchise, becoming even better compared to rival companies that have bigger budgets in their show compared to what Tsuburaya has for Ultraman. Various scenes are also just spectacles to see, along with the older visual effects used such as the iconic exploding clay models and underwater scenes. Coupled with the more silent Ultra, shorter and more direct transformations also help make the show really feel like it's made from the early Heisei period. Although some fight scenes were experimental, they were visually beautiful, with fight scenes for Ultraman always considered as a given these days. The choreography, sets, and camera work throughout the series is something to be commended for, and has become one of the most sophisticated until the next series. Though I do wish they held back on the collateral damage. I like the action scenes, but there's just so much destruction that I'm sure they would have already destroyed all of Japan. And even if Tiga's appearance had no build-up, you can't deny that his return felt grand. Even with the messiness of the show, I'm sure Tsuburaya has learned a lot from their mistakes, and even letting the directors and writers of Trigger to fix its problems and utilize some of its unused ideas in Ultraman Tiga without compromising much of the series, as well as find a proper middle ground in story writing which fits easily into the early Heisei and new generation shows. I would compare the show a lot more with Tiga, but that would take too long and be a better video in itself. Trigger obviously is not Tiga. The show may have elements of Tiga, but it is not Tiga. Trigger is definitely trying to be its own thing with all of its crossovers and remix concepts. With the legacy that Tiga brought and the major success of Z, the show obviously had a lot of weight to carry, But even without that weight, it had a lot of messy bumps, having problems with rewrites during the middle of production from the higher-ups especially, degrading its story, only to be partially saved by the action sequences, revisited and remixed concepts, and concluding movie. Trigger isn't a perfect show, but it's not unwatchable, nor do I think it deserves the hate it receives. Was I disappointed? Yes, I was, but as a Tiga fan especially, did I still enjoy it? Certainly I did. High expectations can truly ruin things. However, I can't ignore the several things it did right, while still being able to pay some decent homages to Tiga. I don't think blindly liking or hating the show would do it justice, but for the people who hate Trigger, I don't blame them. For the people who love it, more power to them. And as for me, I just can't seem to hate it.